Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to welcome my guest today, Darren Brown, who is many wonderful things, but his role as chair of Long COVID Physio is what brings him here today. So we're going to chat a load around the series of videos that have been created and also the International Forum event in September, I think. So welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Jackie. Thank you very much for having me. Much pleasure to be here.
So thank you so much for coming along. Would you mind, to start with, just briefly introducing yourself and what it is that you do?
Yeah, thank you. So my spiel of my introduction is I'm a cisgendered gay white man. My pronouns are he, him and his. I'm of mixed English and Irish heritage. I live in London in the UK. I'm a clinical academic physiotherapist. So what that means is I work clinically in the NHS as a physiotherapist. In London, and I also do research. My background in my clinical and academic work is specialising in HIV, disability and rehabilitation, but also cancer care. And I have experience of living with long COVID, and that is what led me into connecting with other physiotherapists that live with long COVID and the formation of Long COVID Physio. And as you said, yeah, I'm the inaugural chair of Long COVID Physio, which I'm very proud to be. And we've been working hard since our formation.
Amazing. I mean, you mentioned it just then, this sort of connecting, and that's something that I've noticed myself since having long COVID, which obviously sucks. But it has led me to make some really wonderful friends and some connections with people that I would never have met otherwise. So it's really, really interesting, isn't it?
It is actually, and I think something that I've learned through activism of other healthcare communities, and particularly my background being clinical and academic in the realm of HIV, is I learned this phrase from a HIV activist very well known called Peter Staley. And in his memoirs, he talks about connecting to create change. And that is something that we have done in Long COVID Physio. We have connected together and across boundaries and borders to create change. And I think it's so important what connections can do in raising visibility, making changes to people's perceptions, but also in terms of things like research, policy and practice.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a silver lining, I guess, to all of this.
Yeah.
Would you mind talking just a little bit about Long COVID Physio? When did it get set up and I guess what does it do?
Yeah, sure. So our strapline, so Long COVID Physio is a patient-led international association of physiotherapists living with long COVID and our allies that work across education, advocacy and also peer support. And peer support was actually our founding principle. So we were founded in November 2020 as a group of physiotherapists that connected on Twitter across the UK and also the United States as physios that had seen what was going on with the raising awareness that people that had contracted COVID were living with persistent and often fluctuating or unpredictable health challenges. Most of us had not even heard of long COVID, but we started to connect online and realised that we were living with similar things. And that's where we all discovered long COVID and what was happening with all of the early advocates that were doing work from way early on in 2020. And so that was our founding principle in November 2020. We wanted to connect each other, to provide each other with support. And the reason that was important for us is because as physiotherapists, or in other countries, they've got different names. So for example, in North America, our profession might be known as physical therapists. in other countries. So, for example, in France, kinesiotherapists. The raison d'etre of our profession is often around movement. So any reason why movement may be difficult due to health issues or health-related challenges, but also sometimes the treatments for those things. So a lot of what we do is helping people move, and often that is about moving more. So the thing that connected us is that through our core as physiotherapists, physical activity and exercise is often seen as a mainstay of a lot of the rehabilitation interventions that we did, and we all tried to use it to help ourselves. And we all struggled and got worse because of it. And that's why we connected, because we couldn't understand why we were using the thing that we thought would work for our symptoms, including fatigue. And we were all getting worse by doing the very thing that we thought was bread and butter, safe rehab. And that was actually what brought us together, really, because we found this unique area of wearing dual hats, of being healthcare professionals and people living with long COVID, but also the healthcare professionals that often promote exercise and physical activity. And we felt like that's not right, that's not working. And very quickly, we learned so much from other healthcare professionals, other healthcare conditions, other communities, other groups, particularly people living with MECFS, that raised the alarm quickly around stop, rest and pace. And that was where we started, in connecting with each other to share knowledge and skills and provide peer support to each other. But very quickly, we learned that we needed to also share the knowledge and skills that we were finding between ourselves. We needed to translate that knowledge more widely. And that is where education started. So I think it was within a month of us forming, we launched our website in December 2020. And when we launched our website, the aim was to respond to some of the feedback we were receiving, to say, but what do you guys know? So we made our website, we shared that information, and that is then what led us on to work around policy, and more recently also around research activities as well. So in terms of what we do at Long COVID Physio, our founding principles are peer support, but we do so much more around that as well. So we provide peer support to physiotherapists and other allied health professionals living with long COVID internationally. So if you're not familiar with allied health professions, they're the third largest group of healthcare professions in the NHS. There's 14 different types of health professionals that fall under the umbrella of allied health professions, and the ones that are most commonly known will be physiotherapists, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists. But as I said, there's 14 and there's many of them. So we provide peer support to all of those healthcare professionals at AHPs living with long COVID in safe spaces. And what we mean by safe spaces is that it's not a place for people to come and gawp and learn from us. It's so that we can actually share amongst ourselves. We don't educate in our peer support spaces other physios that don't live with long COVID, but that's where our education outputs come in. We provide loads of educational resources, and we have done lots of work around that since our formation in November 2020.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. It sounds like you've sort of grown arms almost.
Yeah.
Kind of exponentially.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that so many different groups have grown quickly. And I think that's a reflection of need. And there's been many groups that have formed, developed, grown. And what's wonderful about many of these groups is how connected they are, and through that connection are creating changes. So for example, in the UK specifically, big groups like Long COVID Support, Long COVID Kids, Long COVID SOS and Long COVID Physio, we often connect and we work collaboratively across our different groups. And so again, using those principles of connecting to create change.
Yes, exactly, because with the many voices you can shout louder, can't you?
Yeah, and bring different perspectives and have diversity in those views and experiences, because long COVID itself is quite diverse, isn't it? So it's quite important that we have diversity in our approaches. And so, yeah, that relates to education, collaborating on those outputs, but also in how we're working with policy, whether that be at the level of NHS England and improvement or further beyond that.
Yeah, using the voice of lived experience.
We'll be right back.
I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID.
we've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us.
Experience to influence the sort of policy is the right word, isn't it? Of what's going on outside.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
That's really, really important. You're right.
And one of our biggest educational outputs early on was the World Physiotherapy briefing paper that we published in June 2021. So in June 2021, we published the 9th World Physiotherapy briefing paper in response to the coronavirus pandemic, and it was titled Safe Rehabilitation Approaches for People Living with Long COVID, and it was specific to exercise and physical activity. And that's now been translated into 11 different languages. It's been used around the world in many of the formation of rehabilitation policies, guidelines and principles. And we know that it has been a bedrock of how to work upon what constitutes safe rehabilitation. And we know that rehabilitation is sometimes seen in different ways, particularly historically. If we look at the historical impact of people living with ME/CFS, about how things like graded exercise therapy and cognitive behavioural therapy were imposed upon people, the rehabilitation can be seen really negatively. But rehabilitation is broader than exercise alone. Rehabilitation is about health and functioning in everyday life, and can be any intervention or approach that supports people living with a disability to either manage and cope with that disability. There may be aims and hopes to improve people's ability to function in day-to-day life, but also to maintain functioning and mitigate deterioration. So rehabilitation can include things like pacing and education, skills training and heart rate monitoring and things like that. So rehabilitation is important, and that's actually where I think long COVID physio comes in really uniquely in the global landscape, which is where we're probably one of the sole groups that brings the lived experience to long COVID disability and rehabilitation, and worked broadly amongst many different areas in terms of education policy, and with our partners including World Physiotherapy and many different professional organisations representing physiotherapists around the world. And so hopefully we'll be announcing a new one soon. So
Yeah, wonderful. But this network of organisations, both within long COVID organisations, but also within non-long COVID organisations, so within the sort of, I suppose, physiotherapy world for you guys.
Yeah, and that was really important for us, because our allies at World Physiotherapy, so World Physiotherapy is the international professional body representing physiotherapists globally. And in 2021, they have every year they have World Physiotherapy Day. And in 2021, in September last year, they made their theme Long COVID, and they used the World Physiotherapy briefing paper, and they worked collaboratively with Long COVID Physio to produce all of their educational materials, which are like one-page sheets on what's long COVID, safe rehabilitation approaches, how to use pacing with your physio or individually. Lots of information, and they've been translated into over 60 different languages. So there's loads of those resources, and they're all available on our website, free to access and download. So we're very keen to continue to collaborate broadly within long COVID circles and beyond, because we know that people living with long COVID are increasing in numbers. So the global estimates at the moment are around 144 million people living with long COVID. Obviously they're estimates, but our data in the United Kingdom through the ONS is probably the most representative data. It's showing that there's over 2 million people in the UK living with long COVID, but recent data from the CDC in the US is saying 1 in 5 people after coronavirus infection develop long COVID. So people living with long COVID are pitching up in all healthcare settings, and so that's why it's important that we also connect across different areas. And so we've worked with different physiotherapy groups that are representing other areas of clinical practice to ensure the knowledge around what constitutes safe rehabilitation is broadly known and widely disseminated.
Yes, definitely. And getting that information out to the people that need it as well. I mean, I've definitely noticed
partly from my own experiences, which haven't been as bad as some, but a lot of people talking about their doctors, if they are supportive, they certainly don't know what to do. They don't know what to suggest. They'll often suggest the wrong thing, some form of exercise when that is not appropriate for that person. So getting some of this information out to those people can only help the patients, because at the moment the patients are having to advocate for themselves, and some are too ill to do that.
100%, yeah. And that's why it's important as well that those people that do have experience of long COVID and maybe have improvements in their symptoms continue to raise their voice and advocate. And I do put myself in that bracket. And so feeling very privileged to be able to continue to advocate for the needs of people living with long COVID.
Because, the people that are too ill to do it, they need someone to shout for them, don't they?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you mentioned the resources on the Long COVID Physio website, and there's a huge amount of resources on there. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that.
Yeah, in terms of our website, so our website's split into multiple different sections. So, obviously we've got an about page which tells you about us, who we are, what we do, our founding principles, our objectives, and also our partnerships. So who we partner with globally. Also on there, we've got our constitution, information about our executive board, and also our terms of partnership, in case anybody was interested in partnerships, because we're always interested in partnerships. But other sections of our website include quick access. So the quick access tab is so people can quickly access the information they need at the right time. Many of those are the World Physiotherapy information resources from World Physio Day last year, the one-pagers that are in over 60 different languages. But then also there's our resources page. Our resources page is split into a variety of different sections, including symptom-specific or treatment-specific or approach-specific information. And they're constantly updated as vast amounts of research and information keeps emerging. We are constantly updating our website. But we've also got lots of other things on there, including our work and more recently, information about our video series and the Long COVID Physio International Forum.
Yeah, you mentioned the videos, and they're awesome. They're so, user-friendly. They're so long COVID friendly.
Oh, thank you. Yay. Oh, it's lovely to hear that feedback. The video series really came from a moment of serendipity. So as physiotherapists, we're constantly trying to connect. At the World Physiotherapy Congress in 2021, which was online. It was meant to be in Dubai, but it moved online. I was part of the Congress Planning Committee, and I'd been on that role for 2 years, so before long COVID and during long COVID. We had different sessions, and one of those was a discussion session on long COVID, and there was a physiotherapist who happens to be an illustrator. She'd seen some of the work that we were doing, and she reached out to us. Her name's Laura. She runs an illustration output called Physio Camera, which is really cool because she's a physio, and she does loads of illustrations, and she's been so generous with her time and offered to work with us pro bono because she felt that information needed to be shared and wanted to use the arts and illustration and graphic design and animation as a way of sharing information in a digestible way. And so we're so happy with how this has been received, because the videos, originally we wanted to create one long video, and we realised that we didn't have the capacity, and also maybe people wouldn't be able to absorb all of that. And so we have been slowly, gradually creating individual chapters of videos time by time, and we're constantly working behind the scenes to deliver them. And there's going to be a total series of 8 videos, we believe, and we've released 4 so far. So there was the first video, which is what is long COVID. The second video is why is it called long COVID? The third video is some of the common symptoms that can be experienced by people living with long COVID, and recognising that we've specifically spoke about some of the symptoms that are least understood and often people are disbelieved about. And it just so happens that there are also many of the symptoms that are under the classification of ME/CFS. And then our last video is about the episodic nature of long COVID and the disability that can be experienced. And so we're super pleased that these have been received well. And we know that our recent analysis has shown that over 144,000 views of these videos have been seen across all different social media platforms. We're super excited that they're being received well. And what really makes me feel like we're doing good with this is the feedback that we receive. People are sharing that these videos are helping them talk with their loved ones, their families, their friends, their colleagues in a way that helps them understand what's going on. And fortunately, we have been able to produce these videos in a way that's very much through co-production. And so we work with people living with long COVID throughout. We have consultants, we have peer review. We go through many phases of iterations and review and modifications to try and get this right. And so the fact that these videos have been received well and are helping people in sharing their own lived experience with others that maybe just don't get it, but also validating people's experiences has been something that's really driven us to continue with this work, and we're super pleased that they've continued to be received well. So we're grateful to everybody that has shared their feedback and support, and also those that have worked with us on these videos, because there's been an enormous volume of people that have contributed to these videos. Obviously the biggest shout out must go to Laura at Physio Camera for all of her generous work and fabulous animations.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, people really struggle to explain what they're going through to people that aren't going through it themselves. I mean, I've found that myself, and, the support groups are full of it. And also, when you're cognitively impaired, some of the time, it's very difficult to find the right words to say it. Yeah. And the idea that people only see you on your good days, so you look fine. If you can just direct them to a video that has done it for you, it makes it a lot easier to have those conversations, doesn't it? And then when people can understand, they try and help in a way that's actually useful.
Yeah. and I suppose that's a video we haven't done, and hopefully we'll introduce some content around, how can people best help their friends, family, colleagues and loved ones with long COVID. But the bite-sized information is what's needed, isn't it? Because whether you're living with long COVID or not, I think we live in an age of short attention spans. Having something short and snappy is beneficial.
Yes, definitely. For people with long COVID, even more so.
Absolutely, yes. We're currently working on our next video, and this video is going to be about the impact of long COVID on day-to-day life. And this is going to be a really different video this time because of how we're producing this. So we're actually working with a number of peer support groups in Somerset NHS Foundation Trust who deliver peer support groups for people living with long COVID. So we're bringing in groups of people with lived experience to share the themes that they want others to know about on how does long COVID impact me in my day-to-day life. And the reason I mention this is because you mentioned there about the invisibility. You see me on my good days. This is something that comes up so often, isn't it? The ups and downs, the episodic nature of it. But often people don't see you when you're at your worst because you're in bed or you're unable to function or you're unable to be around others. And so people do see you when you're maybe feeling better. And what's, I think, needed to be aware of is the work and the effort that goes into being able to pace that means that it's successful when it's so unpredictable, to be able to prepare and plan and prioritize, just to be able to be there in front of someone for them to say, you're looking good. And that feels destroying because you know that they don't mean bad, but it's always received badly, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? And it's because you know that, after an hour of talking to them, you're going to go home and spend the evening crashed out on your sofa.
And they're not going to see it, the preparation before or after.
Yeah, and the fact that you were lying down in a darkened room beforehand as well. I get very frustrated when people don't understand, whether it's friends or family or, maybe colleagues at work if you're working. But I think more recently I've kind of realised that how can they understand if they're not going through it? And I've had a little bit more patience with people, but at the same time, videos like the ones you've been making will really help those conversations when you don't have the energy to really do it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why the last video, which was on the episodic nature of long COVID, seemed to really resonate with people, because it sings to that story of it's up and down, it's fluctuating.
We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
Sometimes almost unpredictable in its nature, and it's not anybody's fault that they're having a bad day. They haven't done pacing wrong. It's just that pacing's really hard, especially when the goalposts move. Yeah, we're super grateful for everybody contributing to these videos and for everybody that's provided feedback, both constructive and positive.
Yeah. I guess it's very validating as well for people. I've sort of noticed on some of my better days, I sort of think, did I imagine that bad day? And then, you see someone else's experience or a video and you realise, actually, no, that's just how it is. And that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for people that do experience post-exertional symptom exacerbation or post-exertional malaise, the delayed onset to those symptoms makes it so difficult to understand what's going on and really difficult to prepare, plan and pace. And especially, as I said, when the goalposts move, if people are getting better, getting worse or fluctuating, it can make it difficult to know how much to do and when to do what certain things. And you start to second guess yourself. Am I doing this right? Am I not doing enough? Am I doing too much? How do I know what to do? And that's why I think, for rehabilitation at the moment, I think a real mainstay of what safe rehabilitation should be is about maintenance and stability. Because with the fluctuating nature of long COVID, we talk about the knowledge of it going up and down where, even across the day, like between different parts of the day, our symptoms may be different. They may be worse or better or just going up and down. And then also over the days, the weeks, and clearly over the trajectory of living with long COVID, we're talking months and years for people. There are differences in how that fluctuates, but then there is also how people talk about the episodes. So where people have crashed or had periods where it's got so much worse, and very often people are very clear around, they can recognise the triggers to that. But when people are having fluctuations, it can be so difficult. And so I do think that safe rehabilitation as a core principle for people with long COVID, and that relates to other energy limiting healthcare conditions as well, should be around stability and maintenance of function rather than an intervention that will make people worse.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Which is a really difficult thing to accept. When you want to do something, you want to do it, right? And to think that I shouldn't or can't do it because there'll be repercussions for me over the next few days, weeks or longer is such a difficult thing to be able to accept, because you have to be so disciplined and self-critical to be able to plan all of that. So, when someone says to you, you're looking great, you'd love it to be a really positive thing. But the reality is that you've done so much legwork just to get to that very moment of looking all right.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Hopefully the videos and all the other work that you're doing will be helping the understanding around this. So.
Absolutely, and that's why we're also delivering the Long COVID International Forum in September this year. So this came from various suggestions to us to deliver what may be considered conferences or courses. Around the world, there's a lot of need for healthcare professionals to receive knowledge and skills and education, because there is a lacking amount of adequate information out there for healthcare professionals. We still have a lot of known unknowns in long COVID. And so we were being asked, when are you going to do a course? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? And then equally on the other side of that, lots of people with long COVID want to have access to that information. And so this is why we took the dive into let's be bold, let's do something. And this is huge, and we're super excited to be hosting the Long COVID Physio International Forum on the 9th and 10th of September this year. And as if anyone's not familiar with this, the strapline is we're bringing the lived experience to long COVID disability and rehabilitation, because we know that biomedical research is critical. We must better understand the mechanisms and causes of long COVID. But in parallel to that, we also must understand the disability that people are experiencing, and we must be able to identify how rehabilitation can safely and adequately support people experiencing disability. And so we want to make sure that there is, in parallel to the existing groups and the existing work that's going on, very rightly so, around biomedical research, that we don't leave behind the disability side of this. And so this is where we're bringing this unique element of bringing the lived experience to long COVID disability and rehabilitation. We're very proud to have partnered with Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions in the United States, who's our academic partner on this and helping us deliver this, and also partnering with Physio again, because we're going to be bringing some arts to this forum. And the reason it's called a forum, not a course or a conference, is because this is not going to be a sit down, listen, didactic teaching session like a lot of scientific or healthcare conferences can be. This is bringing everybody together, and we have used our experiences of delivering conferences internationally with other groups and other organisations to be disability inclusive, be dynamic in our delivery approaches, but also inclusive to bring other people's voices. We're trying to break down the hierarchy of who has the knowledge, because we know that people with lived experience of long COVID probably have the biggest bucket of knowledge because of the very amount of time they're living with this day in, day out. So the forum is in partnership with Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions and Physio. We're very lucky to also have our sponsors. So we're very grateful to Kaiser Permanente, Visible App, Temerty Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto, and also Realise in Canada. And I'll come on to why we have sponsorships in a moment. But we are delivering this forum with 5 different formats. What I mean by that is it's not just going to be someone on Zoom teaching you what you need to know and showing a slide and people sit back and listen. There's opportunities to engage by the different formats we're using. So one of the formats is like our welcome and introduction format, so you get to meet some of the people that are behind the scenes and also set us up for the day. We've also got science sessions. So our science sessions are disability inclusive in that they're limited to 30 minutes, no longer than 30 minutes. We've got an invited speaker who will be using slides to share the most up-to-date science on a topic, but that's not the end of it. That will be followed by a community-led panel of people living with long COVID and their allies to comment, discuss and translate the meaning of this science, so that if people can't absorb the slides or the information that way, the conversation may be able to bring people. And if they can only do 10-15 minutes, maybe that is where they get the information they need about what does this mean to me and I and us about living with long COVID. Another format we have is our discussion panels. No slides allowed. It is a panel discussion and it's on the hot topics. And we have ensured that we have 50% of our speakers living with long COVID. We also have not only discussion panels through our discussion sessions, but we've got workshops. Workshops are making sure that everybody has a voice. So an example of a workshop is we're doing a workshop on pacing, because pacing is really hard. And so
crap at pacing.
But it's because it's really hard, right? And so the workshop is going to be in partnership with Physio. We're going to have some invited knowledge experts around the world come and introduce the topic of pacing, and it'll be live illustrated, so there's a takeaway message of it, and then we go out into breakout rooms and everybody's got a voice. Everybody can share their lived experience, their clinical experience, their research experience, their policy experience, because all of these people are being invited to the forum about this topic. But we don't just finish there, we come back from the breakout rooms, we share the themes that have emerged, and that's also live illustrated. So from each workshop, there'll be illustrations that can be taken away, visual representations of everybody's collective knowledge. And then also the other format that we're doing, our 5th format, is our summary panels. So we're having reflections at the end of each day, so that we have people that have not presented, they're delegates or invited speakers that have maybe attended a couple of sessions, and they're going to talk about their highlights. What was the big thing that you took away from today? And to continue to be disability inclusive, we have thought about the timings of this. Internationally is very difficult, but the timings of this, we've factored in purposeful rest breaks or comfort breaks throughout every part of this programming. So there are breaks between sessions. We very rarely have more than one session back to back, so that we know that people need to pace to be able to take part in this. So people can take a break, lay down, stop, rest, reduce the stimulation if needed. We're also going to be using closed captions throughout so that people with auditory impairments or hearing impairments, as well as people that struggle with lots of different stimuli, will be able to read and take the information on. It'll be delivered live and also recorded for on-demand content. So if people can't attend at all, you're not missing out. You can attend later on. And what we're also making sure to be disability inclusive is that people living with long COVID, people with disabilities, or people with other healthcare conditions can apply for a scholarship. What that means is you do not pay to attend the forum. We have a fee to attend the forum, and we have sponsors because we're paying our speakers. Our speakers living with long COVID, disability and other healthcare conditions are receiving a stipend. We are acknowledging the effort, the contributions, the knowledge and the expertise that comes with being able to deliver any information, whether you be in a 10-minute summary panel or whether you be involved in a 1-hour workshop. We know that there is a cost to people living with an energy limiting healthcare condition, so we're remunerating people with a stipend, and that's why we have sponsorships, and that's why there is a small registration fee for healthcare professionals, academics, researchers and policymakers of $50. But for people living with long COVID, disability or other healthcare conditions, they can register for a scholarship via our registration page and they will not need to pay. So we know that many people living with long COVID and other energy limiting healthcare conditions are struggling because they may not be able to work, they may be having housing insecurity, financial insecurity, so we do not want to contribute to that. So we want to make sure that education and knowledge is freely available to people living with long COVID disability and other healthcare conditions.
Yeah, this sounds amazing, and like you can tell that it's been designed by people living with long COVID because you have thought of everything that would be an issue potentially for people, you know, and even for the people that are too ill to attend on the day at all, because then they can just watch it back afterwards. So, you know, it sounds awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we have a forum planning committee, which is all members of the Long COVID Physio Executive Board. And the vast majority of us are living with long COVID, have experience of living with long COVID, or are really key critical allies. And we, in terms of our people that we're working with, so we've got 17 different sessions over the course of the 2 days. We've got over 80 speakers, and we have speakers from 17 different countries. So we're truly trying to be international. We obviously don't have enough representation around the world. There's always gaps, but we have speakers from the UK, Ireland, Canada, the USA. We've got speakers from the Netherlands, from Belgium, from Finland. We've got Cameroon, Nigeria, New Zealand, India. We have speakers from all over the world. That clearly wasn't 17 countries, but
it was quite a few.
I got a few in there, and I know I've missed a few countries. But yeah, we have speakers from all over the world. We don't have speakers from South America region. So any Spanish-speaking Portuguese speakers that would love to contribute to this forum, please feel free to make contact with us. So longcovid.physio/contact. Very welcome to reach out to us. Southeast Asian region, we don't have any speakers from that area as either. So, you know, we want this to be diverse. We want this to be inclusive, and we want it to be representative. And we know that across the world, people are living and experiencing long COVID. But we also know that there's diversity and differences in healthcare delivery and resources and structures. And so the experiences of me living in London is going to be very different to someone living in another city or another country or another regional area anywhere in the world. So we don't want to be siloed in our information. So we've worked really hard to try and have a diverse representation of speakers. We know that over 50% of our speakers are living with long COVID. Again, more than half of our speakers are women. A third of our speakers are from Black, Asian and minority ethnicity or BIPOC backgrounds. We're working really hard with purposeful diversity and intentional diversity throughout our speakers.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And this idea of getting speakers from all different countries, areas,
backgrounds, we can all learn from each other, can't we?
Absolutely.
Just because somebody is living in a different country doesn't mean that there's not something that they can bring to the table that would be really, really useful.
100%, yeah, absolutely. And, we always run the risk of wherever we are, whoever we are, whatever our beliefs or attitudes, of sometimes finding ourselves in echo chambers, right? And so I think it's really important that we have diversity when we deliver things like this. And so yeah, we're really excited. Registration's open. So if people are interested in joining us, they're very welcome to. As I said, people living with long COVID, disability or other healthcare conditions can apply for a scholarship, and that means they do not need to pay to attend. We have our forum information page, which is longcovid.physio/forum. On that you can find information about our keynote speakers, our MC who's going to be comparing the whole 2 days. We've got a programme at a glance available if you don't want to absorb too much information and you just want a brief what information is there. We've got a full programme available, and also we know, because it's international, our programme page has a really good little widget that we found, which is called Well Time Buddy. So it gives you a countdown to each individual session, and it automatically translates into your time zone. So you don't need to figure out time zone variations, which catches everybody out, right?
Oh, I know.
It is really stressful, right? So we know that we want people to feel able to participate and to prepare and plan and pace their activities. So each of our sessions has its own web page, so if people want to share that, they can. Each of our sessions has a countdown widget and also a link on how to register. So we've tried to make this as accessible and open as possible.
Wonderful. And those links that you've mentioned, I'll drop all of them into the show notes. So if anyone's frantically scribbling down web addresses right now, then feel free to just scroll down and you can just click on them. It must have been a huge amount of effort gone into it all, but it sounds like it's going to be an absolutely fantastic event. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really wonderful hearing about everything you've been up to, and obviously there's loads of really useful information as well. So thank you so much, and I guess I look forward to seeing you at the International Forum in September.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to seeing you there too.
Thank you so much to all of my guests, and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear